Welcome to Bold Agendas, the podcast where we explore the cutting edge of transformation management. In each episode, we engage with leaders, innovators, and thinkers who are reshaping industries and redefining the future of work. Today, we examine how business leaders navigate the next wave of transformation and innovation, where the convergence of critical technologies, AI's cognitive power, real-time data capture from advanced sensors and IoT, and groundbreaking innovations in bioengineering are revolutionizing the landscape. This new phase of disruption is marked by technologies that seamlessly integrate and amplify each other, unlocking unprecedented capabilities and value. In this new era, ecosystems benefit from the network effect of compounded value creation, while radical innovation disrupts markets, establishes new value chains, and redefines entire industries. Good questions at the right time matter, and here are a few that we'll talk about today. Are business leaders thinking broadly enough about the future that's already unfolding? What does strategic planning look like when the speed of change demands agility and foresight? And how do leaders confront the complexity of this moment? To explore these critical questions, I'm joined by Michael Carroll, a global authority in industrial innovation and AI research, and the former Chief Innovation Officer at Georgia Pacific. Mike is a sought-after speaker at industry forums, an insightful author on topics like industrial transformation and AI-enabled enterprise reinvention, and a decorated thought leader recognized as Visionary of the Year by Smart Industry. I'm Mimi Brooks, the CEO of Logical Design Solutions, a business consultancy and transformation advisor, and a leadership coach. And this is Bold Agendas on Innovating Beyond Limits. Let's get started. Mike Carroll, so entirely good to have you. Thank you for taking your time to be with me today. It's very gracious of you. How you doing?
I'm doing fabulous, and thank you. I really appreciate being here, and I enjoy these. So I'm looking forward to it. I know our conversations are always fabulous, so I'm really looking forward to this.
You know, when I was putting this together, Mike, and invited you on to talk to us about innovation, I was thinking that you were one of my, stumbled across you last year at the end of the year. And I think that what happened was because we were both going to the same AI conference in Brooklyn, that the people that kind of hook up some of my networks hooked me up to you because they knew that you were going to be there. And so I wasn't really quite aware of that. But then what happened as a result is that one of your white papers in the fourth quarter ended up coming into my feed. And so I'm like, oh, that's an interesting topic. So I read it and I was like, why don't I know this person? Like, this is weird. How do I not know him? He's like right in my sweet spot of ideas. And that's when I sent the email off to you and said, like, I know this is a little weird, but I really need to meet you.
Very
And
kind.
it's been a good few months.
You're very kind. I think these conversations are really important because most of us like to raise topics, not because we know the answers to these things, because we're just trying to ask better questions, because it's really dynamic as to what's going on out there.
Yeah.
And we live in a world where the uncertainties are becoming greater and greater and greater.
Yeah.
And the better our questions, probably the more equipped we are to get at what these uncertainties mean for us, right? It's not that we're ever going to have all the answers. It's just how do we begin to ask better questions so we can better prepare ourselves for what these uncertainties may or may not mean.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's another way to deal with the increasing complexity too, right, Mike? That it's just getting increasingly more complex. And so, it almost feels like pulling things up a bit, which is why I think that we talk about systems level thinking, ecosystem level rationalization, right? And concepts that live longer than specific ideas, I think. What do you think?
I think that's 100% right. Is weeding through the stuff that is really important that you need to pay attention to, and the stuff that probably doesn't matter
Yeah.
that you don't need to pay attention to because you
Yeah.
have precious resources.
Yeah.
And some of those resources is your own thought, right? And how much energy you dedicate to what you need to pay attention to in order to make a decision. And
Yeah.
how do you do that? And that's been the most difficult thing to do in these times. And of course, the pandemic cratered everybody, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know that we've recovered from it yet.
You know, Mike, it's really one of the big reasons why I wanted to have you on and have you on now. If you don't mind, just let me step back for one sec. You know, I've had some futurists on recently, people like Frank Diana, good friend of mine. Even Charlene Lee, I think, puts a foot in that. And then business leaders who are trying to run these simultaneous short-term and long-term strategies and not feel like they're conflicting, you know. And the thought that I had, I mean, there's always just a million things I can talk to you about, but the thought that I had that I really wanted to explore with you today was a combination of your background and expertise and innovation, which to me is synonymous with the future at this point, Mike. You know, it's just kind of two connected ideas, right? And to try to bring forward what you find to be, you know, some of the more reliable concepts that business leaders can rely on more when it comes to decision making. So if I don't understand the answers, you know, what's a way that I might think about the time and place that we're in, and what are some of the reliable ideas of those concepts? Like, I'll get into the first one of convergence, but just to give you a sense of what I'm talking about. So your thoughts on that?
I think the first place you have to start is you have to test yourself. And probably that first test is a humility test as a leader. And you probably won't want to run home to Daniel Kahneman and say, do I have the right amount of humility as a leader in order to answer a simple question? And the simple question is, when somebody presents me an idea, what's the first thing I do? This is the test. What's the first thing I do? Do I look at it critically to see what's wrong with it? Or do I look at it from a perspective that says what might be true about it? That says everything about you as a leader, because the perspective that you have that says what might be true about it says that you invite yourself to take the same perspective as the person that prepared it, rather than passing a perspective on it of judgment, which is the less humble perspective.
Yeah.
Right now, you're in a judgment perspective, and those people that pass the judgment perspective on they have this idea that what they know is likely the enemy of what they need to learn.
Yeah, I think it's just like a basic approach. You're saying this is just a basic mindset approach.
A basic mindset problem.
Yeah.
In organizations where those people prevail as leaders, you will find that those organizations, typically what they have been doing is the enemy of what they need to go do. So here's the eureka for the people that work in those organizations. Your organization and your business is likely not going to go away in the future. It will still be there. It's just going to have somebody else name.
So, Mike, I was thinking that that maybe this, I'll just call it a thing, this next wave of digital transformation that we could be staring down now, that is a maturing, you know, cognitive AI capability in combination with other emerging technologies like IoT, Mike, smart sensors, if you will, and then the innovation that's happening in bioengineering. Like, can we look at the convergence of these emerging technologies, what they're evolving to individually, and how they're going to converge and amplify each other together as creating almost this, I want to say, next wave of digital transformation? I mean, just generally, do you think that concept is a reasonable way to think about what we've experienced and what's kind of coming up?
I think it's very reasonable. So let's try and put it into a framework that says that from just a classical compute perspective, there's two paradigms. There's the paradigm that says that I used to do ones and zeros and compute everything linearly. And then the new paradigm is quantum, which means that ones and zeros can be 1 and 0 at the same time. And when you can do 1 and 0 at the same time, now you can sort out all the things that don't matter and only focus on the things that do matter. So all the things that don't matter, you immediately disappear at the same time. You solve problems at a different scale than you solve in a linear 1 and 0 test perspective, the way we do, right? So quantum changes the world in the way we solve problems because it can be 1 and 0 at the same time, and you get rid of all the wrong answers all at once.
Right. And that movement out of binary thinking, right, Mike, that energy is a result of convergence, right? I mean, that's where convergence comes in. And then the effect of that, is exponential, right? And so trying to put some building blocks together, the effect of that is exponential. Go ahead.
That's a feature, right?
Yeah.
That's a feature technology has about it. So now think about that as those features create benefits for which you want to use to shape the outcomes that you want. So let's talk about outcomes with regard to what that means, right? When we lived in a world where humans had to do things for themselves, they had to do the calculation of complexity for themselves, whether using calculators, whatever it was, we were at the heart of initiating all that stuff, right? Human brawn did it.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And so now we're going to use machines to do the calculation of complexity for us. Except in that calculation of complexity, the network is not going to exist the way it did before, because the network used to be 6 degrees of separation between people, which became 3 because technology collapsed it to 3. The features of technology collapsed it to 3, which means that every person on the planet today is separated by at least three people from everything else and everybody else. Now It's going to become 1. And it's that degree of separation of everybody by 1 degree from everybody else and everything else, all enabled by the features of technology that shape these benefits for us, that generate this outcome of 1 degree separation. Now, quantum just makes it easier. The technology to do it through standard compute with what we would call agentic AI exists today.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not broadly available to everybody, but the technology in that feature exists today. So now the way we think about networks, where the network used to be the way that we get our information, and more importantly, the interpretation of what the facts and the information mean, that all falls apart because the agentic AI delivers the facts and everything for you 1 degree separated from everything else. So the IoT world that you talk about is 1 degree separated from you. The person that you need the information from is 1 degree separated from you, which means the network is no longer the way that you get that interpretation. It's only adjacent now. It's a complete shift in the way we think about that entire paradigm of the way things are built from a hierarchical perspective. It has dramatic effects for society, dramatic effects, therefore, for organizations.
Yeah.
And everybody will have to change their organization to 1 degree of separation.
So, Mike, if I were to slow that down, because I think that the concepts that we're talking about here, become the perspective of them become the basis of advice that we say to business leaders. Speed matters. The first to decision make is going to, potentially take all or most. I mean, these are big things that we say to business leaders. And sometimes, Mike, I'll just speak for myself. Sometimes I find that, we haven't explained enough why we're saying this. It almost sounds, fantastical, but not necessarily likely. And I think that's a big risk when we talk about, what we think leaders should be planning by, strategizing on, thinking about as approaches, to their business strategies. Do you get what I'm saying? Do you agree?
100% aligned.
Yeah. So,
So,
Mike, go ahead.
go ahead.
I just want to, kind of get an unpacking of the big things that you're bringing up, because I think that each one of them is just such an important point to understand. So, if I may, so convergence as a basic idea, not just maturing technologies, Mike, right?
Right.
Maturing and converging. Those are two different momentums, right? And the characteristic that you're describing, I'll use your language, I think, the characteristic of exponential creates this nonlinear effect in terms of, can I say innovation, Mike, or time to market or product
I,
acceleration? Go ahead.
I think it's all that, right? All enabled by the degrees of separation and the amount of people that are on, you would call, the frontier, because you're no longer separated through the network to people on the frontier. You're immediately connected to all the people on
Right.
on the frontier.
Right.
And so the interesting thing is, if you look at one of the characteristics that all of the companies that have what winner take all markets have, right, is their decision speed is enhanced by the characteristics of their customers being in their ecosystem, so they can iterate on their customer with their customer engaged in them, and test and learn with what their customers desire while the customer's in their ecosystem.
Exactly.
And they use Robert Cialdini's principles, right, in their ecosystem through choice architecture in order to iterate that test and learn, right? A/B
Yes.
testing, right in front of with their customer engaged, right in front of their customer. That makes decision making so much faster that
Yeah.
if you're not doing that, there's no way mathematically you can keep up with somebody that's doing that.
Right.
The math just doesn't work for you.
Right.
Therefore, the difference between you, if you're doing that, and your competition is exponentially different, because you're creating money at the rate that data is being created, and they're creating value at the rate that humans are making decisions, and they are not at the same time scale.
And this is what we mean, right, Mike, when we say the network effect. The
Yes.
network effect, and you have to say, well, what's in the network? The resources, assets, capabilities of the ecosystem, right, Mike?
Yeah.
In the network, and they become highly available real time, often real time, relative to, the learnings, the feedback, customer response. And as a result of that network effect, it's not like we're saying to business leaders, you need to run faster. Speed of decision. We're not saying run faster. People are like, look, I'm running pretty fast as it is. That's not what we're trying to describe. We're trying to describe the building of, the capabilities of these networks. And that's why, Mike, you say that it could have a winner take all outcome because of the speed and ability to innovate and decide and respond is going to create fast, tremendous scale.
And the compounding effect of it.
Yeah.
And so what people will say is, they'll say, well, I've already spent a bunch of money, right? I spent a bunch of money on infrastructure, spent a bunch of money on architecture. What do I go do? Right.
Right.
And the answer is, you become the integrator,
Yeah.
right? You
Right.
become the orchestrator. And so you can't afford for somebody else to come in and try and orchestrate your context, because you are the owner of your own context. Your context is what's true about you as a company, and the processes and functions that you engage in order to make things true about your company. And so what I've just described is the things that you go through that are part of your orchestration engine that engages with your infrastructure and inside your architecture that you will use in order to create agentic AI.
which becomes essentially, Mike, your value proposition. It's new value creation, and it becomes the value that you create in the context of your market, your differentiation, whatever, right?
Yep.
That's,
And the data that comes out of those things is only the evidence that you use to iterate through in the way that you know things are true and the way and the actions you take to make things true. And so the enterprise becomes a representation of what the organization was, except it's now expressed as an agent, right? And so today, as a human, when and so your background is HR, you in psychology, so you know this. As a human, in order to create agency for yourself, you take your understanding of the world, right, relative to an outcome that you want, and you look at an action that you're going to take, right? And so that understanding combined with an action, right, shapes an outcome. That's called agency. You look at the result of the outcome based on the action you took, and then you iterate your understanding of your worldview, right, your principles that you understand about what you did relative to the action. You might modify the action you took next time based on the outcome. And that's the learning loop that you use in order to modify agency for yourself. And the same thing will be true with agentic AI. It will look at the data that's represented from the actions it took and modify its understanding of what is true about the company relative to the functions and processes that it went through in order to generate that evidence and outcome.
Yeah, right. And then, Mike, we could say that those two cycles working together, is what we mean when we talk about learning on multiple time scales as an organizational capability, right? We mean your ability to, leverage machine and human decision making in tangent concert with each other, in order to create exponential value from both of those streams. And over time, they converge even more tightly. But it's all about these learning loops, right? And the ability to process and react to them.
And the learning loop, if you think about what an enterprise was built for, an enterprise was built to exert control, right, around the assets in order to, and the supply chain in order to serve the customer. So it was to give you that reliability and certainty of control to serve the customer. And the enterprise, the organization, right, was built to do that and exercise that. And what happened over time was that as we had demands, competition drove us to become more and more efficient. And at the same time, what happened is that 35 years of experience became 20, became 15, became 10, and now part of it turns over all the time. And so that became less effective. And now what we have is less control over our ability to serve the customer. And so now the way we used to go about those function processes is not as reliable. So we have this felt loss of control because we don't have as much effectiveness in the enterprise that we tried to replace with technology. And all the technology really did was it piled more things to do on the people that are now less effective, right? So we were asking them essentially to text and drive.
Yeah.
Right.
And in a lot of cases, right, Mike, just to stay on that point for 1 second, the work that we push down to people or out to people as a result of technology implementation was a lot of transactional work. Right, Mike? So it's not like we pushed high value work out. We pushed transactional work out, as a means of what we thought at the time was building efficiency within the organization.
Yeah,
so instead of solve, right?
The third data, right?
Yeah.
Because what we thought we needed was the data in order for somebody to look at the data to understand what was going on and what was not going on. But it was always in the rears.
Yeah. Right. This is some of your, I think, Mike, some of your point in your recent white paper that you put out on incrementalism, which I'll just give a plug for, is a great white paper. But you mention in that, I think you kind of pontificate some of the decision-making or thinking around ERP implementations, right, Mike, and the kinds of problems that we really expect them to solve, which sounds like the epicenter of what you're, trying to point to as a concern is what's the expectation about what these things are going to do, the value that they're going to deliver, and we need to be careful about that value relative to transactional work that it can, among other things, create on people. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think what we did was, I think over during that time, and if you look like, say, productivity nationwide, if you're industrial, right, and so say labor productivity nationwide from 2000 to 2010 went up, and these are federal numbers from the Fed, and about 2010 it started to decline, and in 2020 it went up for a little bit, and it started to decline again. And and so during that same time, if you look at kind of what drove all that, you could say, well, there are lots of factors driving it, but the number one factor is that if you look at the rate of retirement, or people coming out of the workforce and retiring from 2000 to 2010, was about, say, 16.5%. It was pretty steady. Right, 2010, it started a steady march to 25%, which the peak was in 2022 and 23. And so you would say that worked. But during that time when it started, to plateau and decline, what you'll see is that revenues on ERPs, while productivity went down, the very thing that we were buying to improve productivity, revenues went the other way for ERPs.
Yeah.
And the question is, we were trying to make ourselves more effective with technology, but why did it apparently not work? And I think you said it, is that we were basically piling transactional, more things to do, back into a workforce that was becoming less and less capable because people were leaving.
Yeah,
right?
knowledge, a lot of the tribal knowledge, right, Mike, which represented a lot of how work got done and still gets done, that isn't quite given the, premium that it should be in terms of, what does work really mean? Therefore, how would we make it more efficient, right?
At an ever increasing rate.
Yeah.
Right. And so, except in 20. So in 20, when everybody turned off all the badges to all the facilities except the people who had to be there, productivity went shot way up. And the notion that more people came out of the workforce during COVID, more people retired during COVID, productivity went up, says that, if you stop distracting your people, they get more done.
Yeah.
And so what it really says is that us as leaders, we're probably more responsible for that by allowing those distractions to happen at the front line in the facilities, by piling all that transactional work back. And so when we turned off only everything except for the stuff that actually had to happen, right, because of COVID,
Yeah.
we got more productive, kind of says that we really need to get back to the basics of why are people there, what do they need to do, right, and focus on that first versus trying to serve the purpose of technology and that transactional work that we thought was just incremental, when in fact it was really just additive sickness over a very long period of time.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to take us off track, Mike, but I just feel compelled to add that, I was doing a lot of human performance engineering at that time. And, I think another factor in this, transactional versus really supporting knowledge work in some way that would make it more efficient was, these technology solutions that really were more about back end than front end, solutions. And we used them as front end. We pushed them out to people as if they were front end solutions when they were, in fact, back office infrastructure solutions. Yep. And, vendors sold them effectively. I'll give them credit in that regard. But we pushed them out, to people with very little, I think, front office value, really. Thoughts?
And we were all trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Hindsight, what they say about hindsight, it's all 2020. I think looking back at it today and understanding that, your infrastructure is going to be there and the world is going to be an agent-based world, probably all that stuff looks way different today than it did even 3 years ago.
Yeah.
right? Your perspective is way different, that you're going to orchestrate agents to do all the work outside of your infrastructure. You're going to have to be your own orchestrator, and or at least act like your own orchestrator. You may have somebody build it for you, but you got to do your own context. And it'll be an interesting new world, and the people that get there first likely have the biggest leg up. We'll see. We'll see just how much geography and regulation limits the ability for all the verticals to become winner take all. Because when you start making decisions digitally enabled by the customers being in everybody's ecosystem, that's when you'll start to see all the marketplaces become winner take all.
So Mike, if I pull us kind of back to business leaders who are trying to decision here, and I focus for just a minute on strategic planning, the processes of strategic planning, what nets the long-term roadmap, what nets the comprehensive plan to get from here to there. How do you think, all of these factors of value creation, business growth, innovation, change the process of strategic planning? What should leaders stop doing as they think about their strategic plans, and what strategies or approaches might yield, more useful and successful outcomes, do you think?
I think you need to believe that 5 years from now, you won't look anything like you look today.
Yeah.
And that in 5 years, you need to have your strategic plan needs to say, everybody, my organization, my business, my operations are all 1 degree separated. Every employee, every customer, from everybody and everything else. And when I look like that, that makes me think differently about assets too.
Are they still assets? Are they liabilities? Are they any smarter? Are they more valuable? Yeah.
So imagine you're a customer, and you're 1 degree separated from everything. And what COVID taught us was that the inventory model doesn't work very good when there's no inventory. And the next question they all ask is, how do I buy capacity? Because it's capacity that gives me the resilience I need. I don't really need to have capacity. I need to have assurance of capacity, because I'm trying to build resiliency. So how do I get transparency to capacity where I can basically buy a spot in capacity and through your work together and be able to manage my access to that capacity and get it made relative to where I need it closest available relative to where it's used.
Yeah.
And now what you're talking about is a capacity marketplace. Now think about a world where agents are all 1 degree separated from that, and that there's a capacity exchange where actually is the asset capability is a part of the exchange.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And now your ability to do that matters more than your ability to build inventory.
So, and that goes back, Mike, as a lot of this does tend to be a bit circular, that goes back to our, definition of the ecosystem that you're doing business in, right? Because these are the definition then of the ecosystem and your partners, and, how resilient that ecosystem is as a result of the network capabilities that you've got built, right? Which brings some of the capacity advantages that you're talking about relative to resilience. Yeah.
And everybody would say, well, what makes that happen? What makes that happen is that there is a gap today that exists between the enterprise and the asset, right? You can't see in real time, so everything's running in arrears. When you build agentic AI, that gap collapses, and now you see in real time, so you have transparency as to what's actually going on in real time, between the asset and what the enterprise is expecting to happen. So that update happens in real time.
Yeah.
Right.
That latency is gone, Mike. It's reduced or gone, in 1 degree of separation. Yeah.
Degree of separation. And so the minute that's gone, now real-time capacity is always updated. And
Yeah.
that's the issue with all the way all the legacy infrastructure was built, was that what was planned and what actually happened was always in constant iteration because it was always done in arrears.
So, Mike, just to get a couple of definitions on two concepts that we keep coming back to, just for our folks that might not be quite as familiar with the language that you're using. Could you just slow down and describe 1 degree of separation, where it started moving towards a tighter multiplier, lesser multiplier, and how you think agentic AI, becomes this catalyst that gets us to, among others, a catalyst that gets us to 1 degree. Can you just explain those two concepts, agentic AI and its relationship to 1 degree of separation, and what you mean by that?
Yeah. So today we all carry these things, right? And the technology of those things, because of social media, basically collapsed the world through technology into 3 degrees of separation. Look at LinkedIn. How many degrees of separation exist on LinkedIn? And or you can just do a simple search. And so there's been lots of studies out there that actually look at degrees of separation in the advent of technology in the connected internet world. Say, what's technology done in its ability to connect people? Because people used to be connected through other people, not through the features of technology itself. And some people say it's 3.4, right? But it's about 3, right? So technology itself has connected people in ways that we now take advantage of, we just don't think about, right? And through those types of tools. Now, imagine a world where if you want to know something, you don't have to get on the app to know it. Agentic AI basically takes agency for you just wanting to know it, and reaches out and does all that stuff for you to generate the outcome you're looking for. So it'll run through and it'll do all the processing. It'll open all the individual applications on its own, do all the calculus that it takes to generate all the information and deliver the information to generate the outcome you want and tell you what to go do.
Yeah.
Right? All for you. So it'll bridge that entire gap of calculation to get you across all that extra separation. So if you want to know something from one person on LinkedIn, you don't have to connect to 3 different people. It does it for you.
Right.
That's the difference.
So, Mike, 1 degree of separation to any person, place, piece of knowledge, resource that's needed at any given point in time. And the difference is, this is not me hunting for it. It's hyper personal. It's really what people are talking about when they're saying hyper personalization, right, Mike? It's finding me because it's understanding, my context and maintaining my privacy about that as well, right? My context, and bringing me what I need. So that's the uber crazy findability problem solved, right, Mike? That's the findability problem solved, that when you think about, time burnt from a enterprise perspective has just been massive, right?
So imagine you're trying to solve an optimization problem in the company, right? And you want to know what's the best outcome I can get for today if I buy X. It'll calculate all the options and tell you what that outcome would be immediately, right?
Yeah.
If you're CEO and tell you what would have to change in the organization to make that outcome true from a means perspective.
So, Mike, if I'm going to go back to my point that you were, responding to a minute ago about how leaders do strategic planning here. So you say, look, if we need to start from the perspective that says different ball game 5 to 10 years from now. It's just not going to work the way that it works today. We have to just put our cards down on the table on that one, because otherwise we're stuck with one foot in the current state, right? Not quite committed to the future state. And we're not going to have enough resources or attention, just human attention, to deal with planning for the current and planning for the future simultaneously. Let me stop. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of what you mean, right? So Mike, is strategic planning now a right to left process almost entirely? A right to left. It is, right?
Yep.
How is it not? When is it not, Mike? How does the current state factor in strategic planning that's right to left like that? Meaning, I know you know what I'm saying, but right is like, here's where we want to be, this is what we have to do to get there. And so now the relevance of the current state in that planning is what, Mike? Talent, for example, or whatever.
So I think the shape it takes is that it goes from being that to something that you're trying to say, what's my landscape for the future look like? Right? That I need to operate in. And what headwinds and tailwinds, given that future, am I likely to face? What capabilities will I need in order to be successful with
Right.
the headwinds that I have, and to take make the best of the tailwinds that I have, right? What means do I have, and what partners would be best for me in that landscape of the future? And is my business actually configured right for that landscape, or do I need to be in a different kind of business for what that future looks like? Because the hardest thing is we take what we have done in the past is we'll take and develop a project or an investment, and we'll make a bunch of assumptions based on what we've known in the past that works. Except the way we've done that is the error we've made is we made an assumption about labor. And that assumption about labor in that economic model said that it built the operational model that we needed to use, which informed the engagement model employees had to have in order to operate the equipment to achieve that ROI. Well, guess what doesn't show up at the plant today?
Yeah.
The employees to run that engagement model effectively, or let alone safely, right?
Right.
Which is a whole different conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that was all baked into an assumption when you built the investment.
Yeah. So the planning process and what you're describing, Mike, to me, and I said this to you in an email recently, so it's not a conversation we haven't started before, looks more like a strategic foresight almost exercise, right, Mike? It says, we think the future, of the industry and our marketplace is dominated by these ideas. We decompose those into scenarios. We assess those scenarios based on probability and risk. And then when we move them right to left, we move them right to left in terms of the capabilities that the organization is going to need in order to be able to meet that future, build that future effective, whatever analogy you want to use. And so it's strategic foresight, scenarios with probability, risks and outcome, organizational capabilities needed, and then you can factor how I get from here to there as the left to right momentum.
It's the what would have to be true conversation that everybody, Brian Evergreen about, right? So it's a wonderful conversation, right? What would have to be true in order for us to be successful in that? And out of that, what you say is, all right, once you find there's truth out, you say, what's the causality of those?
Yeah.
Am I in control of those? Can I get in control? Can I have partners that help me with that? Because if you're not in control of it, of that causality, go to Vegas. The odds are better.
So in this momentum, in this way of thinking and planning, Mike, what is your concern about incrementalism? Like, how is that not measured transitioning, and what do you think the risk of incrementalism is? Is it a mindset that you're going into it with? Let me let you kind of tell me how you think about it.
I struggle with it because part of me believes that incrementalism really may really only affect the names of the assets, right? And the names of the companies, because the people that are being incremental, um, they basically set their companies up to be acquired because their assets still have value, and the people that make decisions faster, they separate themselves to the point they get to decide whose assets they want and whose assets they don't want. The problem is that over time, underinvestment in an asset sets that asset up to be disposed of differently than proper investment. So the employees that are in that asset, had other decisions been made, are kind of at the consequences of those decisions, which bothers me. But I think that in the article that you mentioned that I wrote, I talk about legacy.
Yeah.
If you value your legacy, you'll change your behavior. Because I don't know that people fully appreciate how much speed of decision really matters today, and that how much their dedication to learning impacts speed of decision. If you look at companies that excel, their executives dedicate a lot more time to learning. They read 50 to 100 books a year. So ask yourself, do I read enough, right? And do I have the appropriate range with which to understand that it's really about these technologies and how to think about how to apply the features that technologies bring to generate benefits, because everybody's enamored with word use cases. And the news flash in all this should be use cases are not scalable.
Yeah.
The learning from a use case only is used to create a value case that is scalable. But the use case itself is not scalable. It's only used to generate learning. So it is to help you
Yeah.
understand what the features that a technology bring enable you to create benefits, right?
That's a scary thought, though, right, Mike? I mean, of course, I agree with you. What I mean when I say it's a scary thought is that, sometimes, a couple of, no regret, let's call them no regret use cases, which is almost even worse when you think about it from a characteristic perspective, right? No regret use cases are the sum of the innovation that I'm doing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm running a strategy of the current state and saying that I'm putting efficiencies on the current state.
I would recommend people read a couple books, and I told you this. I read this book by Joseph Heinrich called "The Secret of Our Success," and I talked to you about this book. And when I first started reading this book, I had difficulty with it, and it turned out that Joseph was challenging the very thing that I had firmly held beliefs about. So I had to set the book down and say, why am I struggling with this book? And then when I realized that it was my own beliefs that were really in the way, so a little humility on my side, I picked it back up again, and I let go of all those things that were in the way, and I actually got what he was saying, and it's the notion that the things that actually make us smart come from our culture, from our society, and they are embedded in us and passed through many, many people. And we add our nuance and our innovation, our creativity to that. And then we pass it on to others. And oh, by the way, that can be lost. And it has been lost many, many times throughout humanity.
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you're only born with the hardware.
Yeah. It kind of goes to that analogy, right, Mike, of you know, being comfortable and being a part of the system, a part of the community, right? Whatever the definition of that is, you know, versus seeing, you know, my contributions most important as an individual,
That incentive
right?
conflict is true, isn't it? Because you
Yeah.
got to be careful as a company that you don't over-index on the incentives of the individual. I think there's a
Right.
lot of companies have that problem, and you know, Stephen Johnson's book, you know, he wrote a fantastic book where good ideas come from. And in that, he talks about the quarter power law of innovation. It basically says that if you're a town or you're a city, because you're 100 times larger as a city, you're not just 10 times, you're, or 10 times larger as a city, you're not just 10 times more innovative, you're 18 times more innovative because of the quarter power law of connectivity, because of the way
Yeah.
everything's connected, right? And so now imagine everybody's separated by 1 degree, right? And so you got all these innovative people, and instead of being separated by 3 degrees, everybody's separated by 1 degree. And so now the innovation factor in the world goes up by 70,000. Now that's exciting, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That is exciting when you think about the good use that we could put that mind share to, right?
Yeah.
The collective mind share. Mike, let me ask, just transitioning us just a little bit, if you don't mind, to this idea of you know, the organization of the future, the new enterprise renaissance, you know, if there is one, and maybe you know, it kind of pulls in, or it is the discussion of, you know, what's the humanity here on the other side of this, Mike? Like, what's the, you know, commitments that are realized, the good outcomes for people, you know, if we build the enterprises that we're talking about here. If we leverage technology to its maximum, if we're operating in a 1 degree of separation world, you know, and leveraging technology for good, where are people left here, Mike? And what's the promise?
So technology, it's it. So let me back up a second. I was having a conversation. I was having a conversation this morning, and I was asked a similar question. And there's a scene in a movie called Good Will Hunting where Robin Williams is sitting on the bench with Matt Damon. And it's probably one of the most famous scenes in cinema, where he looks at Matt Damon and he says, "You can tell me everything about the Sistine Chapel." Because Matt Damon is a genius, right? But what you can't tell me about is you can't tell me what it smells like. You can't tell me what it feels like to walk inside that building. There's a difference between being able to calculate complexity and being able to use compute and know things versus experience life. Hopefully, because we've been so distracted with having to calculate things in our life that have gotten more complex, we get to experience life again. And which means that likely, and I know you probably had it here, is that maybe the classical virtues become more a part of our lives over what they have become, which is wisdom, temperance, fortitude, and justice. And we get to experience what it's really like to be human when we become less obsessed with the calculation of all the complexity that has been thrown on us because of technology, really, right? Because we've had to rely on our network to get us all this information that everything has pounded into us, and we want to know more and more and more because it's available. well, now the agent can solve all that. And because it's available, we're no longer having to rely on the network and spend so much of our capacity or bandwidth, right, to put it in technology terms, to seek it out or the interpretation of it.
So, Mike, is that your optimistic view? In other words, if we really harness and leverage these capabilities, in the best way, I'll say, in the best way, the opportunity for us is to spend more of our time doing more creative, more human, you know, um, things in the future than, making the donuts, if you will. And is that the optimistic view? And is there a pessimistic view that you think is possible?
So let's test that for a second. I'm always like to test it with what we've experienced in the past. And so I want to believe that's true. I also think that lowest common denominator or entropy, however you want to look at it, is probably true about us as a species. So let's test that. During the flourishment that happened during the Renaissance was enabled on the backs of a bunch of very hardworking people that were peasants. And what they enabled a bunch of folks that owned the land that they worked on and generated wealth for these people to not have to work and dedicate their time or pay other people to dedicate their time to these thoughts about these classical virtues and art and stuff that I just described. And so part of society got to go live the good life on the backs of people that weren't able to go do it. Right.
Yeah.
So people went after that when they had the opportunity and a bandwidth to go do it at the consequences of other people. The question I'm asking myself, and I don't know the answer, that when everybody has that bandwidth and everybody will continue to work because people have to execute, people will always be needed to execute things, right? Automation is not going to take over everything. We have to be, people will always have to be able to go do things. There'll always be monitoring, always be a place for every one of us. The question I ask myself is, when you have the bandwidth, what will you choose to do? What will you choose to do? Those people chose, right? Most of them chose to dedicate themselves because the peer group they were in were after advancement in thought, because they were all trying to keep up with each other, right? In that group at the Renaissance, all the lords, the kings, and they were all trying to keep up with each other because that's what the peer group was built around. The question is, what will we do in our peer group? Because today, remember we talked about the network. The network will exist for social coordination, not for interpretation of things. And what will we use the social coordination for? Will we use the social coordination for our peer group to advance and our thinking around classical virtues or what our interests are, right? How will we use that? I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah. It's almost like this funny question, right, Mike, of, what's the range of human choice that would be possible? Given the option, right? You would imagine that it would end up being pretty wide, as it tends to be under other circumstances today, right?
Yeah,
Interesting.
When you think about these things, you learn a lot about yourself too, right?
Yeah.
And I'm a pretty, even though he passed, and it was sad he passed last year with Kahneman, but Daniel Kahneman, the things that he said, you need to understand that first thing that happens is you observe reality, and that reality, you then take that and you compare that to your past experiences. then it becomes biased, right? Because of all your experiences, you biased reality by trying to interpret it relative to your past experiences. The next thing you do is, in order to explain it to yourself, you convert it to language, which is dimensionally reduced from what you just biased it to, right? So now it's a lie you tell yourself, and then in turn, everybody else. Not intentionally, it's just you do it, right? In order to try and understand it, try and understand it. And he said, a person that's self-aware understands that about themselves and everybody else. That's why they start with the approach to this: what might be true about this? Even in themselves. How do I know? Unfortunately for me, these days, I find I know less and less every day, because there's more I question, and to me, it's not about what I know. It's how do I ask better questions?
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're all headed in this, is that agentic AI, because of its ability to deliver complex calculus for us, will enable us to ask much better questions.
Yeah. And it's not right, Mike, just the value of the importance, the criticality of the better question. It's also avoiding the wrong question at the wrong time, because that degree of separation in terms of where it takes you can be quite far, quite fast, given the other factors of speed and movement going on around us, right?
So when you and I were talking before, and I don't know the answer to this, the networks that we live in today have a certain comfort with their domain over interpretation of facts and things. For the very short term, there's going to be a lot of discomfort in the world around the change of that. So whether you're media or your government, whatever you are, or your ability to interpret for people is going to disappear. And there's going to be a great deal of discomfort, even companies, right? That discomfort is going to cause a lot of waves. I don't know any way to describe it. You probably describe it much better than I do. But it's going to be we're all going to feel that.
Yeah. Yeah, the system level changes are going to be unbelievable, right, Mike? The system level changes are going to be unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how to.
I don't know how to process. I'll say, as a side comment, we can talk about this another time. Like I'll just say for me personally, just in order to have more time to think about the things that I either care about or need to care about more. I've had to get rid of a lot of execution level work that was kind of in my life, in my daily routine, in my problem solving, repertoire, just to get away from it and make time to think about, the things that I care about more, that I think might be more impactful in the long run. It really does. We talk a lot about, leaders and organizations, but at the end of the day, it's really quite challenging from a personal perspective.
Well, I think, and that translates into the office, into the enterprise, is that this stuff is so far reaching. It's just not about you at home or you in public as a person. It changes your company. And you talk about what's the organization look like? Wow, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I have no idea. Flat? I want to say that, but that's probably not possible. I don't know of a flat human organization ever do you know of one in society ever that's functioned?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I think they're almost easier to think about, what it won't be than what it will be, what it can't be than what it will be, right?
Yeah, because you're still going to have social coordination, right? I think as humans, you can't get away from the fact that we're all social creatures, and you're still going to have to, even though you're going to be directed, right? And you're going to be the executional arm of direction. You're still going to have feedback as humans, as individuals. That all still has to exist in order for you to have a company, an enterprise. People have to have a purpose. That's all still going to have to exist, and you're going to have people deliver that message. That's never going away.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So then you say, well, what are those systems and structures, right, Mike? What do those systems and structures look like? What form do they take, and how does action move through them? How does action literally kind of reliably move through them? I tell you one thing I'm glad about is that I'm not in government. I'm glad about that.
Well, you know what? In the workplace, nothing replaces me talking to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah. It's true. It's true. These, this the human network effect is a big idea, right? And how we think about, spending our time and attention there. Certainly more on my radar screen as things you feel like you'd never have quite as much quality time to do as you find the value associated with it, right?
Yeah, I don't like the alarmism of folks saying your job's going to go away. That's not going to happen.
Yeah. Can I just make one final, comment on that, Mike, just because it was one of my wrap-up questions and you kind of got to it before. And I was going to ask you, if we looked back 10 years from now when we said, what companies made it, why would we think that they probably did? And if I looked back and said, if they didn't make it, why didn't they? So on the second one, I feel like what you were saying before was that if the company has intrinsic assets and the leader doesn't make it or the company doesn't make it, then what was really lost was the brand, right, Mike? It was the brand of the original company, the legacy of the individuals involved as well.
Yeah.
But at an organization level, it's the brand, right? If I had intrinsic value, somebody else, sucked us up and figured out what to do with that, how to turn that into a growth strategy that was sustainable, right? That somebody cared about going forward in terms of its value prop. That's what you were saying, right, Mike?
Right. I think it's pretty simple. The companies that make it don't let what they know become the enemy of what they need to learn, right? And they don't let what they've been doing become the enemy of what they need to go do. The ones that don't make it, right, they do the opposite of that. They let what they know be the enemy of what they need to go learn, and what they've been doing is the enemy of what they need to go do. That's really simple. And the way you do that as an executive is you don't dedicate yourself to learning, and you don't make decisions fast enough. And
That's great.
And you signed your own death warrant.
And Mike, is there any, similar idea that you might have relative to, and how we do that, that doesn't misstep and preferably, contributes positively to some of our big concerns, people, purpose, planet, etc. Is there a how we go about doing that ensures some of the safeguarding of the big ideas that we hold important?
Absolutely. If you want to go do something, don't start with the technology. You said it earlier, right? Go straight to the people, because it's the experience of the people that matters, because they're the ones that actually still get things done. And they will always be the folks that get things done, right? Work is experienced when people are involved.
Yeah.
Right. You can't replace that. We've learned it, and we will learn it again. A lot of times I say, if you're not careful, you will get stuck behind the event horizon of your own arrogance or ignorance. Take your pick.
Yeah. Yeah. Likewise, to your point, even though it's changing, and, certainly with your background in industrial innovation, there's really nothing more satisfying to watch and see than the great work of humans. People doing great work. It's just, it forever fascinates and
It is.
amazes me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It absolutely is. You know, we talked about it. Einstein's most misunderstood quote, right, was imagination is more important than knowledge. And what he meant by that wasn't that knowledge is not important. What he meant by that was, do you have the humility to not know the answer? That's what he meant by that.
That's a good one.
Because all the people that tried to solve the problem that he solved with relativity, what they knew was the enemy and what they needed to go learn. Right. And he didn't go after that problem as if he knew the answer. He started asking questions. What's it look like to me if I'm traveling at the speed of light? That's the imagination part.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great. Well, Mr. Carroll, I could go on and on here with you, as you know. And so I'm going to do that by having you back on again. In the meantime, I'll talk to you offline and keep up with the things that you seem to always get your fingers in the pie on, which is a bunch of interesting stuff always, Mike.
I appreciate all your comments, and the stuff I write, I don't write because I think it. I write it because I'm just trying to ask better questions and help get people engaged to help all of us ask better questions. So I appreciate your feedback.
Mike, I think that you are consistently thinking about the collective good. I admire that a lot about you, and it certainly has benefited, me personally as well. So thank you again, and thanks for being here. And I'll look forward to keeping up with you as we go through some interesting times. Lots still ahead.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
Good to see you. Thanks, Mike.